Hi, welcome everybody. I'm so excited to be here today and talk about After the Rush, how CPAs can automate and improve for next tax season. I'm Jody Padar, the Radical CPA, and if you're not familiar with me, a little bit about my background is I own my own firm for 14 years. I sold it in 2020, and for the last 5 years, I've been on the venture-backed startup side, really building technology. Like the last year, I've really focused on really helping CPAs kind of go through change and really leaning into my radical CPA-ness. And when you think about me in the past, I used to be radical CPA in the cloud, and now it's like radical CPA moving towards the future. What does that look like with using AI and more technology and really helping CPAs change for the future? And I'm really excited to be here today with Anna from Progress ShareFile to talk about how tax season went, how it can go in the future, and how now is really the time to change to get ready for next tax season. So we have a better next tax season, whatever better means for your firm. So Anna, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
My name is Anna. I am the strategic advocacy lead for Progress ShareFile. And I am equally as excited to be talking about After the Rush, about how CPAs can automate and improve processes, because that's really what we do at Progress ShareFile. We really just exist to help people, help accountants specifically, make those workflows that are really cumbersome and manual, make them the easiest part of your day so you can really get back to doing what you love. And so we've, have a lot of information. We've spent a lot of time researching researching the industry, interviewing our accounting clients. So, building specific workflows for accountants. All of that basically translates to, we've talked a lot about workflows. We understand accounting workflows, and I'm super pumped to be representing the company to hopefully provide some helpful tips.
From word on the street, what I've heard is that a lot of people said it was their best tax season ever because we didn't have like the leftover ERC stuff. We didn't have, there was a little bit of tariff stuff, but it wasn't like crazy tax law changes. And it was really the first year post-COVID. And I know COVID was like 5 years ago now, but we didn't have all the crazy stuff happening. So the fact that only 12% said that it was their best year is interesting to me, because everyone else who I've talked to has said, oh no, it was like a really good year. But it's good to hear that only a few of the group had said that, it was their worst year ever. So, every year is a challenge. Every tax season is new. We never know what to expect. But I'm hoping that as we talk about like what we can do to our firms today, it really helps us evolve so that next year, we're in that 12% saying it was the best year yet. So next up is I want to talk about technology you use today to send, store, and share files with clients. So I did this poll last year, and I did it again on LinkedIn, and I really got an interesting response. So when we think about how we're using tools to connect with our clients from a customer experience perspective, we go to kind of the mainstay of how our documents are stored, where our workflow tools are. And the current population, or at least of my social media followers, were 17% are using, Go File Room, CCH, or Access. 35% are using ShareFile, woohoo. 27% are using something like TaxStone, Canopy, or Smart Vault, and 21% are using something else. So what is that something else? Is that something else still the K Drive, where you're not using anything connected to a portal/workflow software and you're really just storing documents? Or is something else, some alternative thing that wasn't specifically listed? So the cool thing is 35% of you are already using ShareFile. So whether you're here to learn more about what ShareFile can do and what it can help, or if you're thinking about changing tools, I think today's presentation will help you. So let's talk about busy season. And I would say it's a burnout season, or a burnout cycle. 78% of firms still seem to get overwhelmed during busy season. 65% is it the broken process? Is it the deadlines? Is it the fact that we don't know what's coming? And like 42% of us are still burning out. And it's really not about working harder. It's about building smarter stuff. And if you're familiar with any of the work that I talk about, a lot of times I talk about radical pricing, and radical pricing is about pricing your services correctly. But the whole idea of radical pricing sits on top of truly practice management in the back of your firm. And when I think about practice management in the back of your firm, it's about systematizing, productizing, standardizing everything you do so you can get to a fixed price up front. And when I think about tax as a whole, most of us, not all of us, but most of us fixed price our tax returns. And the reason I say they fixed price them, because either you're pricing it based on, a certain type of form, you're pricing it based on a certain level of complexity, right? Or, we all price based on, well, what did we charge them last year? And then maybe we up it a little bit, right? So that's why I think tax is one of the opportunities for fixed pricing as opposed to hourly billing. But in order for fixed pricing to be profitable in your firm, it means you have to have everything behind the scenes running well, because otherwise you're going to lose your shirt. And so when I think about pricing and I think about, where we need to go as a profession as a whole, it's really about productizing, standardizing, and really getting the backside of our offices organized so like we don't have this crazy busy season and it's not a burnout cycle. And we all know that tax season is kind of morphed into this never ending season anyways, because we go from tax season to after tax season where we're catching up on everything, to summer where we get a couple of weeks of vacation. Then it's time for extensions again. And then it's like we get 2 months to kind of get ready for next tax season. And for many of us, depending on the state we were in, if there's like some sort of disaster or natural disaster, all those, our season gets extended anyways. So I really want you to think not about a season so much, but how you're going to change everything in your firm to evolve so that you're not living between season, but it just kind of happens. And I think if you start to think about things as productizing, systematizing, and doing all of this stuff, then it's not such a seasonal work. It's just kind of how we work. And tax ends up being a much smaller blip than it currently is for many firms. And so we kind of get out of that burnout cycle.
I totally agree. And I would also add, another reason not to think about it seasonally is that, if I'm not mistaken, the accounting industry is having a little bit of a pipeline shortage. And that has been something that's been ongoing and those aren't easy problems to solve. And so how do you continue to promote growth when when there's a pipeline shortage? It's going to be about figuring out how to be efficient all the way through and being able to do more with what you have. Again, because some of these problems that the industry is facing just aren't that easy to solve.
Absolutely. So really what's happening is it's not volume, it's chaos. Our systems are overloaded. We have technology that can't keep up with modern demands. And whether we're still using a K drive, or we have technology that isn't talking to other technology, or we haven't even just reevaluated our technology in the last 10 plus years, right? How do we think about it to reevaluate what we want to do? We have the deadline pressure, the constant race against time. And again, how do we rethink that so it isn't such a race against time? Client volume. Do we have too many clients for the work we want to do? Is there an opportunity to increase pricing and kind of get rid of kind of those F clients, or kind of those lower level clients that we don't want to serve or no longer fit our firm? And then let's think about process inefficiency and how many times we're working around something because at one point it worked, but we just haven't relooked at our systems and our processes to reevaluate them and to see where they should be. And, instead of fixing those symptoms, let's kind of look at it holistically and let's fix our systems overall and get ready for next tax season. And what does that actually do to us? Well, first of all, I think it we lose revenue. We don't even realize how much lost revenue happens because we have too much time on admin and not enough time on technical work, or we don't have the right people doing the right level of work. Our teams are getting burnt out. They don't want to work 60 hours a week during tax season. They want to work, 45 or 50. I'm not saying that there's no overtime during tax season, but it certainly shouldn't be kind of this craziness. And so when we look at how much work gets reworked or triage and the chaos, how do we contain that chaos so that our team can work smarter, not harder? When we're so busy catching up, we don't have the opportunity to grow. There's no room to scale. There's no room to add work in your firm, right? If you don't have capacity to do the work, and I know every firm is struggling with staffing shortages, if you don't have that extra capacity, do you have the opportunity to bring in really good work just because there's kind of chaos in the back end? And then do our current clients leave us because they feel they're not getting the service that they deserve because there's chaos behind the scenes? So again, if these are things that have, like, even if not all of them have affected your firm, if some of them have affected your firm, now's the time to rethink about how we can, change things up for next year.
I would add to, process is painful to change. I think I would definitely acknowledge that. But if you put in a little bit of time, it could save you more time down the road. I know that sounds really simple, but that's happening all around, even with like learning with AI and automation. It's a new skill set, but if you put in the time now, it will pay off. But not underestimating how painful it can be to make those changes, but they're well worth it.
Well, absolutely. I think what happens is we get so caught in billable work that we forget that the non-billable work actually gives us a bigger return long term, right? So if we spend a little time on our process, and the tools are there for us to make documenting processes so much easier today than they have been in the past, that now we have the opportunity to make those changes. So let's just think about a simple tax return. You have your initial client call. Do the expectations get lost? Are they there? Now you're going to chase your prior year document chase. We're hunting through emails and portals. The current year docs might be a mess. They're incomplete submissions. And it's not that our clients want to be difficult. They just want it to be easy. And they haven't really thought about how it affects us. So how do we help them understand how to work with us better so that it makes our process better? And then you have the prep, stop, repeat, which, causes you to rework the work or rework the file. And then we have filing and payment delay. And so every step, it just seems like in the 1040 process has friction, and every friction point truly is a fixable process. But you have to take the time to look at each one of those pieces and think about how it can work better in your firm. And there's no perfect way. When I say that, meaning your firm might be different than the firm next door or the firm across the street, but there are definitely a lot of kind of best practices and then like standardization that you can kind of gather from each other. So when we think about firms being slow, it's really your intake system is slow, and it's really about email overload and the manual chaos that goes with it, the threads with the organization or lack their organization. And if something goes to one person's email and it doesn't hit the other person's email, then you have like this lost tax document. And again, all of those things that if it were only one client, it's really not that big of a deal. But what happens is that one client becomes 10 clients because your team wants to serve that one client extra special. And then what happens is now all of a sudden you have 45 extra special processes as opposed to following one process. And part of it is just communication, because you haven't really spent the time helping your team understand that their little specialness for their one favorite client has now created a little bit of chaos on the back end. And I don't think people intentionally do it, but somehow it just overtakes your system. We have client portals where sometimes there's complicated interfaces, so clients avoid using them. How about that client that sends something via text because it's easy for them, and let alone the security risk around it? It's just they want it to be frictionless, and yet it creates more friction for you. And then when the docs trickle in and you have to restart over and over again, like how much time are we losing? How much valuable stuff are we losing? How much valuable time are we losing, especially if you're an accountant who's doing this work and you don't have admin staff. So not only is it time, it's frustration from your professional staff, and also kind of wasted money, right? Because you have a CPA now chasing documents on work that could theoretically be done by either automation or admin.
I would also add on the previous slide too, a note about how all of those like inefficiencies, we're using tools in the ways that they weren't meant to be used. Like email wasn't designed to facilitate necessarily like huge document transfers in a very secure and seamless way. It was just email, you know, and so we're relying on tools to fit needs that maybe that we've outgrown the tools and what they can do for us.
Right. And if you go back to the old days when everything came in via mail, it was actually a lot simpler that way, because we had one way and it was one point of contact, and either people brought their stuff in or they mailed it in. Now it's like you get pieces of information 14 different ways from like every different client. And sometimes you have one client who sends everything 14 different ways. I don't know why they can't even get their act together.
Yeah.
So then you have, now we're into the prep loop, right? So you're reviewing the information, there's incomplete information. So now you're asking clients for missing documents, you're repeating it because it's not happening with just one client, there's multiple clients, and you're waiting because you're waiting for the response, and you're trying to get ahead of it because you're like, oh, I got everything in, but we're still waiting on 2 documents. And I know we've all been there where like those 2 documents that you put a return on and hold for in, you know, the end of February, and you still haven't gotten those last 2 documents in March, somehow the first week in April, you seem to pass on it and you let it go out the door because you realize either you're going to use an estimate for that number because the client just hasn't gotten back to you, right? So part of it is us too, right? Like not knowing when to pass, because we hold out hoping the client is going to send us something without just making an estimate. Yet the first week in April, somehow that document we were waiting for somehow became less of a priority. So, you know, there's that never ending prep loop. Some of it is imposed by the work and some of it is actually imposed by us and our need for, I'll say, perfection versus getting stuff out the door. And then, you know, we didn't even get to signatures, payments, and the great ghosting epidemic, right? So signature delays, and the billing black hole, and like how we're going to get paid, and chasing those final documents, right? And, you know, I know a lot of you won't file until you actually get that final signed form, but I know that there are some of you in firms that will actually press the button because you know the client. But it just seems like a lot of things get caught there at the final stage, and absolutely we want to get paid. So how do we change our processes so we do get paid? And is there an opportunity to bill up front and to kind of cap off your capacity so you know who you're going to serve and how you're going to serve them? I worked with a firm that is doing that, and they've had tremendous success by billing up front, collecting payment up front, and therefore allowing for capacity during tax season because they knew exactly what they were going to do. Back to like kind of pricing, and you're not charging too much, you're doing too much for too little. So when you think about all those steps that I talked about just for the 1040, you know, a lot of preparers are still in the under $500 range. And that's amazing to me because like Intuit is charging more than that, right? And Intuit, we as CPAs or, you know, specialized tax preparers absolutely should be charging more than that. But when you break it down for like what the value is or the not, I'll say the price point for each step of the way, really it looks like the real cost to the firm is greater than $1,500, right? So where are we on a pricing perspective? Where should we be pricing these 1040s? And how can we use automation to speed up that process so we're not losing our shirt? Because I know right now a lot of us eat money on 1040s. And we do 1040s because we know the value of having a 1040 in your firm for other referrals, for the businesses they're connected to. But we also need to not lose our shirt on them because our process is inefficient, ineffective, and we end up having a poor client experience because of it. And those tiny inefficiencies, add up to be a big impact, right? So if you do just a 15% inefficiency on 2,000 returns, that's 3,000 wasted hours. And I would argue burnout doesn't come from working a lot. It comes from working a lot and being frustrated on the work you're doing. And so if you want to be doing more complex tax work during tax season, instead of chasing documents, the burnout comes because you're chasing documents, not because you're doing complex work. So, it has an overall effect on your team, and nobody likes that. And we also know many of you aren't just tax firms, right? Like tax is just a compliance service. That's one piece of it. We're either doing bookkeeping or accounting. We also have sales tax and payroll. Some of us are doing CFO services, and we have advisory. So how do we get the compliance piece to work seamless so that we can do a lot of the other things better? And we have time for them, and we have energy for them, because it's not just about time, it's about having that energy to do that work. When we think about the gap, what we learned in school was tax code, technical accounting, and compliance requirements. What we didn't necessarily learn was process optimization or workflow management or how to scale operations. And so we went to school to be technical, and yet truly a lot of our struggles in firms comes from like having incomplete processes. Kind of we want to make our clients happy, so we go over and above instead of kind of standardizing them or getting them on a program to get with the process. And because we're growing on hustle, we end up hitting a wall, and that's when we get frustrated. And what that really ends up costing us is the opportunity for lost growth. We don't have time to do advisory services. We end up being burning out our team, burning out ourselves. Our margins get crushed. And then we have this technical bloat because maybe we've tried to do it over the years, and we end up piecing together all these systems. And not only are the systems not talking well to each other, but they're costing us a significant amount of money, because each one has it's like $10 for this and $15 for this. And we end up having all this extra cost associated with the tech bloat that we have. And so we get overwhelmed, but we're overwhelmed because the system is broken, and it's not always our fault.
I would also just add, I think what's interesting about the tech bloat piece is that it's common to think that, oh, if I have a problem, let me get a piece of technology or a tool or an application to solve it. But when you start looking and buying for tools to solve one-off problems, well, then you have a bunch of one-off products, as you had said, Jody, that don't integrate and that don't work together. They're actually, potentially, it's ironic. We buy technology that makes our lives easier, but if it's not integrated, it can make your life harder. So I just think it's interesting. It's not technology, but it's selecting the right technology that can really help.
So what's the radical fix? How do you rebuild your firm in 4 steps? Well, I'm going to tell you, audit everything. Take the time now over the summer when it's less slow and look at every step in your process. And there's tools like Scribe, that is basically an AI tool that can help you kind of document and see what you're doing and kind of share it with your team. So, and it's about asking your team how they do things, not following the process that you established 7 years ago, right? Because chances are it's changed and people are going around it anyways. So audit everything, make sure they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. And if they're not, it's okay, but just find out why, because maybe you don't even need to do that step in your process anymore. We really have to think about why we're doing what we're doing and how to just take a look at it, right? Then you're going to systematize it. You're going to create SOPs, which are standard operating procedures, templates, and standardized flows. And that's where a tool like Scribe can come in. You're going to automate the pain. You're going to think about using AI and other tools for repetitive tasks. And then you're going to train your team, and it's going to be mandatory. I think we think that we're going to release something once and everyone's just going to follow the plan. No, nobody follows the plan. They listen to us. They say, oh, great, we're in the meeting. But then, a week later, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So we're going to do it repetitively, and we're going to make sure our team understands it and understands the reason behind it. And we're going to help them actually change, because the change management part is probably more complicated than just picking the tech or even utilizing the tech.
You can also, when you're auditing yourself too, if you're brave, you can even ask your clients like, hey, what's working or what's not working well? They'll probably give you really honest feedback. We have some clients actually that will record themselves and then go back and watch it all over, just because sometimes it's a different experience to catch it. And then when you're talking it through, you're like, oh, well, I'm spending a lot of time here. This is something that I should maybe be automating. You might be surprised.
And I love that, because if you have those clients who who always tell you the truth, call them up and be like, hey, how are you using our system, and how is it working, and what's not working for you, and how can we do better? Because now's the time, because they'll appreciate that you want to evolve and change for them. And it's a great touch point to have. So think about rebuilding the document process first, just because I think that's where most of the pain lives. What does it mean to have guided portals with checklists? What does document recognition mean? Is there a way to categorize those documents? And is there a way for deadline-based reminders? Because I think intake is where the chaos begins. And with that.
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of show an example of what we have built in ShareFile to help you rebuild that document process. My biggest recommendation is to start offloading those administrative workflows as fast as possible. Like I said earlier in the call, it can be really overwhelming to think about having to overhaul every single system in your firm. You can take it one step at a time and just simply auditing your onboarding process or what your process is of just collecting documents from clients. These are two routine processes that happen all the time. But we hear from accountants that they are, especially requesting client documents, PBC lists are incredibly painful. It was actually in some survey data that I read, it was named as one of the biggest bottlenecks in terms of process. What you're seeing here on the screen is a pre-built workflow. So this is what it could look like. We've designed this workflow specifically so that it's built in the product for accountants to use. There are other products where you can build these yourself. But as you can see, you're just picking a template. You're auto-filling the data in for the client, so there's no manual data entry. And also, I don't know if you caught it, but there's a green box that says signature. E-signature is native inside of this tool. So that's kind of also what I was talking about earlier too. When you're solving one problem with one tool, you're going to end up with lots of tools. Instead, you can also think about what process you want and find a tool that meets all of those needs. So like ShareFile, we've spent a lot of time talking to accountants, and we knew that onboarding was a bit of a lift. It could be quickly automated, and that integrated e-signature would help keep that entire workflow in one secure place, and it just happens seamlessly. I think this is a really good example of an easy workflow that you can begin to automate right away, because onboarding is repetitive and it really doesn't change. So those are some low-hanging fruit type of processes that you can start automating. And just as you automate, thinking about what steps are redundant, repeated, manual, and just by asking those questions is when you can start maybe thinking of, well, if this is really redundant, can it be automated, or can I use AI to summarize this for me? So yeah. That's a little bit of an example of rebuilding your document process.
Yes. And I love it because everybody needs an engagement letter for tax. So it's like the perfect example.
Process doesn't change.
So then think about how we can kind of kill the email, use updates and status dashboards, and how are we going to automate those touch points? Because again, the more automated we can get, it makes for a better experience as well, because not everybody, like if your clients know what they're supposed to do, it makes everybody happy. And a lot of it is just explaining those expectations to clients as well. I think a lot of times, like, we've gone astray because we've tried to accept the exception instead of stepping back and saying, hey, wait, we set up a process here there's a reason there's a process. How do we kindly redirect our client back to the process and help us and help our client as well? Because a lot of times the client doesn't mean to like mess up your workflow. They're just trying to do something quick and easy, but we haven't necessarily owned our own part of that and stepped back and told the client, hey, you know, we have a portal for a reason. This is why we should be using it.
Yeah, and I would also add that some of the work that admin work, if you are too busy to do it, it will then get passed on to your clients who are probably also too busy to use it. So it's either you get held up delivering it or they do. It's stuff like understanding what the status of an engagement is, having to go back through email threads to understand like what documents were submitted and what wasn't, manually filling in forms, like still having to like sign a document, scan it, and upload it or use different tools. Like all of these things can get passed on to the client, which isn't a really great experience. And so if your goal is to grow your firm, grow your number of engagements, improve your client experience, but do all of that with the same resources and the same time, it's really going to be helpful to have the right technology that's built for you. 71% of firms, according to one survey, are increasing their technology stack to help bridge that gap of like, this is where we are, this is the resources we have. As I mentioned at the top of the call, you know, there are some hiring constraints. So what are we going to do? How do we grow? It's going to be technology. What you're looking at here is a tailor-made workflow inside of ShareFile for accountants. Oh no, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. What you're seeing here is the secure client portal. What I love about this is that clients can see everything that they need to do in one central location. They need one login, and you can see immediately it's, you need to fill out this form, you need to upload this document. Instead of you, the accountant, having to manually call or email to remind or follow up with clients, let a tool do that for you with automatic notifications, email reminders, those kind of things. Those are small, but I know that they definitely eat into my day when I have to follow up with people. And then the other thing that's built in here, you're seeing the client side of it, but the uploading documents, that's another workflow that we created. Again, I talked about how document collection is a huge bottleneck for firms. So we've built a workflow that does it for you, just because all of those things we were talking about, using email and just trying to find everything, and maybe the client sends you the same document in 6 different ways. Well, now they don't have to. There's just one way for them to do it, and it's all consolidated in a very secure client portal. You kind of remove the chase. No, like I said, no manual reminders. It really helps improve transparency, kind of eliminates those follow-up calls of like, hey, where are we on this? What do I need to do next? Well, it's all right there. And I think what's really great about a portal is that you do have an opportunity to train your clients on how to work with you as well. When we're talking about processes and standardizing them, like that does extend a little bit to your clients too. And like, you know, by having a portal, you can kind of set those expectations and say, this is where we're going to communicate on, you know, on these document workflows. And I think you training your clients, you know, how to work with you via portal, but also making sure that tool meets your clients where they are, making sure it's really easy, making sure it's mobile first. Those are all different considerations, but really the end goal is that these tools for automation, they also help solve those client touch points, because a lot of accounting is collaborating with clients. And so those are also workflows that you can automate, not just the ones you're doing behind the scenes.
Right, absolutely. And making sure that it's customer friendly, and then you're actually communicating with your client on how to use it, right? So if your client goes back to email, you just nudge them gently and be like, hey, don't forget we have a portal over there. Because a lot of times, you know, they might try and skirt you, but like if you kind of direct it back, they will get the hint.
Yeah.
So I think we're afraid sometimes to like be the one to kind of ruffle feathers, but the reality is if they were to go to a doctor's office, the doctor would redirect them as well.
Yeah.
So, you So then we get into just standardize everything that repeats. And that means templating all your workflows, making sure the role clarity is there and the handoffs are there. So if admins are supposed to do something, make sure that the admins are doing it and not your professional staff, because a lot of times professional staff just want to do it because it's easier. They have the relationship. But again, that's like cost to you as a firm owner that is more expensive, because if you're paying if it's admin wage versus professional staff wage, right? So the right person should be doing the right role. And again, if you can automate that task as well, let the automation do the role that it should be doing, and not kind of letting people do work that technology can do as well. And then make sure that you have like checklists that work. And just remember, think about like the tools that you can use to make sure that everybody knows they're on the same page. And again, that's a tool like Scribe or something.
And I would just add to that too, I think your point is absolutely correct, Jody, in that, make sure the right people are doing the right things. But I would even take it a step further. If there are multiple people doing the same thing, making sure they're doing it the same way. Standardization helps make sure that clients are having a uniform experience, no matter if they are working with, this person or this person. The onboarding process is the same. That helps just from an internal standpoint of making sure everyone's on the same page with the client, but also it's great for your client experience. I had said earlier on a previous slide that automating those admin tasks are low-hanging fruit and are really easy to get started with. That's not to say that you can't also automate some of your high-value processes as well. So we know that tax returns are very big, and that tax season is very real for accountants. And so this is an example of a end-to-end workflow that comes inside of ShareFile that will automate the process from start to finish. And it kind of shows different pieces of technology coming together. You've got automation, you've got templates, but also you have AI that's built into these workflows as well. So when you get a document back that's pretty lengthy, you can use document summarization tools. You can ask questions about the document to help it quickly summarize it for you. So it's kind of a bringing together a bunch of different features and tools together into one workflow. And in this case with ShareFile, it's one that we build for you, not one that you have to build yourself. And like I said, it includes everything from, we've streamlined onboarding. We've pre-built the document request list for that. There is a document request workflow embedded, so collecting documents is really easy, and it's sending the reminders on your behalf. You can collect digital signatures with the benefit of knowledge back authentication that is no extra cost. And then meanwhile, you're protecting all of these exchanges. There's some really personal and sensitive information that's being exchanged. We haven't really talked about security, but email isn't always the most secure platform, and human error, we know, is the #1 reason for a lot of security breaches. So using a really secure platform can help kind of bring some peace of mind. And not hinder your flow. Security doesn't have to slow you down if you're using a tool that has it baked in. So yeah.
Awesome. I love it. And I love that all these templates are already in there, so you don't have to like rethink it, because the reality is most of us can use a templated document with 1 or 2 changes to it versus having to start everything from the beginning to figure it out. So totally. I love that. And I would just like to say that tech is not the strategy, it's the multiplier, right? Ultimately, it's about like putting together siloed apps, making sure we're thinking about process, we're integrating our system, we're taking a holistic approach to how we're running our practice that includes pricing and standardization and productization and all of those things. And tech is like just, it makes it work so much better. And it makes us just do our jobs and kind of get out of that burnout that we talked about.
I cannot stress enough the integration piece, and also just like checking your tools regularly to see what updates have been made within them. Tools that you're using might have new features that you didn't know about when you started using them years ago. So that's the case with ShareFile. integrated e-signature used to be something separate. Now it's wholly built in. And so for some of our clients, there was one client who was spending like $30,000 a year on a separate e-signature tool. It is not needed. You're not only consolidating costs, but also by bringing it all in one tool, reducing the number of steps to get something done.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's that tech bloat again. It's like, and it used to be you could wait till after tax season. I would say we should always be thinking about process and like how we can improve things and iterate through along the way. So, start small, go fast, and keep going. So think about what's the most painful thing in your tax process right now. You can test it with depending on the size of your firm. If you're a firm of 1, you probably can just do it. If you're a firm of, 50, you're probably going to want to do more of a pilot, and then measure and iterate and see, like, so that you can get ready for extension season, so that the next tax season, it won't be starting from the very beginning. You'll have already gotten through that extension season to see how your new processes have worked, and you've been able to iterate through them along the way and make the changes so that by the time you get to next year, it's going to be a lot smoother sailing. And so, you have the opportunity to build the firm that doesn't break you. It's one process at a time, one system at a time, and one decision at a time. And that's what leadership is. It's like saying, look, last year was okay, but I want to make it better because I want my team not to feel burned out. I want them to have the best tools, and I want them to love their jobs and want to stay at the firm that they work at today, because retention is going to be huge in the future. And I know by using automation and by really organizing that practice management, it's the way you can have a not so busy season, right? And so let's build it to breathe, and let's build it so we can scale it. And scale could mean growth, or it could mean just keeping the number of clients you are, but working a lot less. And so with that, want to take a test run, there's a free ShareFile trial. You can go ahead and scan the QR code and see if it would work for your firm.
Jody, thanks so much. I love chatting with you about I love efficiency. It's like my love language. And I think the one thing I would end on too is I loved that you started with talking about how, doing what you love. Like, accountants don't become accountants to do admin. You didn't go to school for this. And how do we free up time to make your work more enjoyable? I just can't underestimate, like, that's why I work for ShareFile. I believe that if we can make people's jobs, like, I went to school for what I went to school for. And like, I love doing what I get to do every day. It's, learning about accounting and, how products can help people. And yeah, I just wanted to say thanks for really mentioning that, because I think it's really important.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks.